So it's like, I often say to managers, look, here's a great conversation you can have with everybody on your team, however big or small the team is. Sit down with them and say, hey, if I wanted to motivate you and get the most out of you, what could I do? Tell me some things I could do that would really work for you. That makes a huge difference in the chemistry and the performance of the team.
Because a lot of times people hate change. And how do we deal with that on a team? Welcome to Start With a Win, where we unpack leadership, personal growth and development, and how to build a better business. Let's go. Have you ever wondered how to build a team culture that really works? Today we talk about that on Start With a Win. Coming to you from Area 15 Ventures and Start With a Win headquarters, it's Adam Contos with Start With a Win. We're sitting down with Mike Robbins, a guy who knows a thing or two about creating winning teams and thriving workplaces. From being a star baseball player to becoming a sought-after keynote speaker and author of 5 books, including We're All in This Together, Mike's insights have helped companies like Google, Microsoft, and Airbnb. If you're ready to hear some powerful lessons on leadership and company culture, you won't want to miss this conversation. Mike, welcome to Start With a Win.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Awesome. Mike, I'm really excited about this conversation because I love team building. I love the leadership mindset and how the influence of leadership impacts so many people on a daily basis, both in the small business space, whether or not you're running a small store or something like that, and you're leading the people that walk in the door to the cash register, or you're in big business and you have a team and you have to accomplish something. But I want to start with that word team. I think we overuse the word and underappreciate what it stands for, Mike. And you've done so much work on it. You were a professional baseball player on a team. You've consulted to so many different large firms. Tell us, what is a team and what's it take for us to actually call ourselves a team?
I think, it's an interesting kind of basic question, but a good one, I think, Adam, because really to me, a team is, a group of people who are committed to each other and committed to something bigger than themselves. So, from, being in the military, that's sort of the ultimate, being committed to something bigger than yourself. But even as an athlete, I felt like the best teams that I was on, yeah, we had some talent. Of course, you got to have some good players, just like in business, you got to have some smart people who know what they're doing. I imagine in the military too, you want people who know, how to handle the different things they have to handle, because we're talking about life and death. But at the end of the day, it's really about, the trust and the connection that the humans have with each other and the commitment to, the larger purpose of what we're trying to do.
Oh, totally. I love that. And you've talked before about kind of this, okay, we have a superstar or whatever. And I've looked at, kind of comparing, you've got, like, for instance, in the National Football League, you have a Pro Bowl team, which is like all these superstars. And actually they don't function very well together, frankly, when you look at it. And then you have a Super Bowl team who has a great leader. You've got a couple of key, leaders in the team, but for the most part, everybody is focused on doing their job for each other. Yeah. What's your perspective on, having all these prima donnas or egos or whatever versus how I get the rest of these people to function well?
Right. All-star teams in sports are interesting because you look around and you think, oh, wow, Pro Bowl team or all-star team in basketball or baseball or hockey. It's like, oh, we have all the best players. You think about like the Olympics over the years, sometimes it's challenging. The USA basketball team, pulled it out at the end, and Steph Curry was amazing, who, by the way, I'm a little biased just because I'm here in the Bay Area and I'm a huge Warriors fan. I love Steph. But the thing about it is really that in sports, we see this a lot. Sometimes the team you root for, you go sign some great players in the offseason. They come in and it's like, oh, they don't quite have the chemistry, because that's what's really important in sports. Just like in business, and I often say, again, I use Steph Curry as an example, and whether you're a basketball fan or not, it's like Steph is not only this incredibly talented player, but he's such a great teammate. And if your best player is also one of your best teammates, then you got a chance to be a really great team. So like in a small business, even if the smartest person, or maybe it's you or the salesperson or the person in a bigger company, again, it's the CEO or the person who's producing the results at the highest level. If that person actually has the ability to focus on not just themselves, not just what they're doing and their outcomes, but other people and making other people better, that makes a huge difference in the chemistry and the performance of the team.
You talk about chemistry and performance, and you use the word culture a lot. How does that play into it? How do we build a culture? What is that?
Well, there's lots of cliches, right? The whole, culture eat strategy for breakfast, I think is a good one when you think about it. And for me, Adam, coming into, I played baseball growing up. I got to play at Stanford. I got a chance to play professionally in the Kansas City Royals organization. I hurt my arm when I was still in the minor leagues, but I played baseball from the age of 7 until I finally retired at 25 after 4 surgeries on my pitching arm. And I couldn't quite articulate it when I was young because I didn't really understand it. But there was that thing that, again, was about rooting for each other, being more focused on the team succeeding than simply the individual performance. And look, it's not that even on the best teams I was on in terms of chemistry and culture, people still wanted to do well individually. We all still wanted to get drafted or get to the big leagues or whatever the individual ambition was. But we put the success of the team above the individual ambitions. And that is, by the way, really hard to do in our society because we focus. I mean, I often joke and say, what's teamwork called when we're in school? Cheating, right? It's like we don't really work well. We're not trained well to work in teams until you go into the military or sports or other things. And even, by the way, in sports nowadays, it's still like, are you going to make the varsity team? Are you going to get a scholarship? Are you going to get the biggest contract? And so it takes a lot of faith, quite frankly, to count on each other, lean on each other, and trust, like, if we believe in something bigger than just our individual accomplishments, we're going to be okay.
That's interesting because it seems like we have this very fine line when there comes time for a promotion or cuts on the team. You know, maybe you're working so well with, maybe you're a first baseman and you're working so well with the other first baseman, but it comes down to we only have so many first basemen on the team, so somebody has to go, and you go from being team member to competitor. Right. How do you maintain a little bit of that cultural integrity when everything's said and done, when it comes down to who gets voted off the island?
Well, I mean, so I get drafted by the Kansas City Royals in 1995, and I go to spring training in 96. The way baseball works, right? The draft's in June. You go off and play sort of the short season. Next year, I go back to spring training. I'm so excited. I've dreamed about this my entire life. I'm in minor league camp. I get there. Pitchers and catchers report a little early. I put on my uniform. It's a big league uniform. A couple years old. It's got my name on the back. I mean, I'm like a little kid. It's like I felt when I was playing Little League and I'd put on my uniform at 7 a.m. for a 3:00 game, right? Go out to the practice field and we have a meeting. And I knew some of the guys because I played with them the summer before, but as they're talking to us in the meeting, I count how many pitchers there are. And there were 75 pitchers in the meeting. And I counted again. I'm like, there's 75. And then they told us during the meeting there was 25 more pitchers, what they said, across the street, meaning in big league camp. That meant there were 100 pitchers in camp with the Kansas City Royals. And about 3 weeks later, probably 25 of us or so were going to get cut. And I looked around and I remember thinking to myself, these dudes are not my friends. Oh, wow. Because it was really kind of a me or you thing. But what I learned that very first spring training, I didn't get cut. Thankfully, I made one of the minor league teams, but I was miserable. Like I didn't pitch well. I had knots in my stomach. And I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to make it to the big leagues by rooting against everyone around me. And I say that because it's very natural for us as human beings to have that fear or that scarcity. And sometimes in life and in business, someone gets the promotion and we don't, or someone gets the business and we don't, or, we got to downsize and someone loses their job. That's real. And I believe there's a difference between positive and negative competition. Negative competition is when we root against each other, coming from a place of fear and scarcity that, Adam, if you're successful, that somehow takes away from my success. Positive competition is when we push each other, challenge each other. Yes, we compete, but we do it knowing that if you and I compete, it's going to make both of us better. And at the end of it, I might lose ultimately. I might lose my job, lose the business, have to do something else, but I'll still be better off because I competed with you and you helped me raise the bar. We've all had that experience in life and in business. The question is, where are we coming from when we engage in that competition?
That's amazing. I remember and I'm sure you remember this, when Usain Bolt was in the Olympics.
Yeah.
And all of these other runners were running against him. And Usain won the race, but the next two people behind him broke world records. Yes. So they actually ran faster than Usain had ever run.
Totally.
And even though they didn't win the gold medal, they both broke world records and set personal bests because they were competing against the group. The group was rising together in the competition. It was amazing.
And I'm a big believer in putting ourselves in situations where we get stretched, we get pushed, we're afraid, maybe I'm not good enough to be here. We have a bit of that imposter syndrome. I actually think imposter syndrome can be a really positive thing if we don't freak out about it. like another example from my own life when I was playing sports, I got recruited out of high school, from different colleges, and education was really important in my family. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the two schools I was most interested in were UC Berkeley and Stanford. Both good schools, both good baseball programs, both local, and they were both recruiting me. Now, Stanford's program was a national program, had won a couple national championships, recruited all over the country. Cal's program, while good, not quite as strong as Stanford's. And Cal was recruiting me really hard, and I was tempted to go there. I really wanted to go to Stanford, but I was scared because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get to pitch at Stanford. They're recruiting all the best players in the country. Cal's recruiting some really good players, especially in California, but it felt safer to me to go to Cal than to Stanford because I thought I'd have more of a chance to play. At the end of the day, I ended up deciding to go to Stanford. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made because, yes, it was more challenging, but I felt like it made me a better player, and it also changed my mindset. This is no disrespect to Cal, and I probably would have had a great experience there and a great education, but there was something about being on the baseball team at Stanford and also being a student at Stanford that there were kids from all over the country, and they weren't like so smart and so talented. I felt like I couldn't keep up, but they had this thing. Almost everyone I met at Stanford had this thing that it was like when it came time to like, who wants to do the thing? They would raise their hand and say, I'll do it. And I was like, maybe that's important, is the willingness to just say me, whether you think you're ready or not. And I've, my friends that I played baseball with at Stanford and some of my friends that I was just in school with there, we're now all 50 years old now. I've seen them be incredibly successful. And I don't think it's because they're so much smarter or more talented than other people. I think it's more the mindset of, I'll do it. And that taught me at an early age, like put yourself in a situation, even if you think the people around you are better than you, it will make you better as long as you don't let your ego get all bent out of shape about it.
I love that. It's so amazing. And some serious competitors, both in the business space as well as in sports, have come out of Stanford. Yeah. So there's something to be said about building that mindset. Speaking of mindset, I want to talk a little bit about change.
Yeah.
Because change is like this big, it's crazy with your mindset. It really messes with you. And you always talk about how change is exciting.
Yes.
Can you get into that a little bit for us? Because a lot of times people hate change, and how do we deal with that on a team?
Well, I've done a lot of research on change. I get brought in to speak a lot, small businesses, big companies, when there's change going on. And gosh, look at the last 5 years.
Right.
Oh my goodness, how much change have we all gone through? And look, we don't know exactly what's coming, but whether it's political or social change, whether it's economic change, whether it's technological change with artificial intelligence and other things, safe to say the next 5 years are probably going to involve quite a bit of change as well.
Right.
Most of us as human beings seek and fear change at the same time, right? We seek change. Like everybody listening to us, watching us, you wouldn't be listening or watching if you weren't interested in change in a positive way. Like I want to grow, I want to get better, I want to be more effective. But then there's the change that just happens, right? It's like the economy changes, the weather changes, there's something that happens in our life that we don't particularly like, or in the business or in the market that we're in. And the fear part of change is that it's unsettling. Even positive change. Sometimes, I talk to people, sometimes it's like, I got married, I bought my dream home, I got my dream job. And then there's this weird, like, it's kind of upsetting, not like it's a bad thing, but it's like, wow, is this all there is? Or am I good enough for that? Or whatever, it's like, I remember when my wife and I, when our family moved into this house that we've lived in for the last 8 years that we love, it was like a week after we moved in and we were so happy. And I leaned over to Michelle and I was like, I don't know why I feel upset. And she's like, me too. And we were like embarrassed, but there was this sense of like, this was this huge change that we were so happy about. But so I think it's important to have some grace with ourselves to know that change can be upsetting, even if it's positive change. If it's more negative change, of course, we sort of understand it's going to be upsetting, but so much of it has to do with how we relate to it. What's the story we're telling ourselves about it? And what's the story we're telling everyone else about it? Now, we don't want to be phony Pollyanna, like, isn't this great? We just had to lay off half the company. Like, no, that's not a positive change. But there is opportunity even when those things happen. And a lot of it is, again, how are we thinking about it? How are we talking about it?
So we're generating fear and stress when we talk about that, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, we have to convince ourselves to turn that fear and stress into optimism and opportunity. Is that?
Yeah. I think so. And look, we all know this physiologically, like excitement and fear in the body are almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I've learned this, I'm sure, Adam, you've learned this as well through your life and career in like public speaking, right? Something I do all the time. I know you do a lot of. it's terrifying for most humans to get up in front of other humans and speak, right? And sometimes people say to me, they'll see me speak and they'll say, wow, it's so amazing you don't get nervous. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't get nervous. I'm a human being like everyone else. Like, yeah, I'm not as terrified as I was 25 years ago before I started doing this for a living. But what I've learned over the years of public speaking, just like as an athlete, I've learned some techniques to take my fear and that physiological sensation in my body that's happening. Like if I'm up on stage and there's 3,000 people in a big ballroom in Las Vegas for an event, like, yeah, my body's actually vibrating and my legs are shaking a little, like all that's happening. I just have a very different story in my head. The story isn't like, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget what I'm going to say and they're all going to hate me and they're going to walk out and think I'm an idiot. The story is, how cool is this? I get to do this for a living. Let's go.
Right.
And that's the way for me that I'm able to then tap into the excitement of it as opposed to get overwhelmed by the fear. And look, we all have that ability. You may not want to get up and speak in front of thousands of people, but you can transform the fear and by acknowledging it, but then choosing a different path.
Awesome. I love that. I mean, there's so much to learn here, folks. And I'll tell you what, the first time you ever hear somebody poke their head back from, upstage and they're like, there's 10,000 people out there. Are you ready?
Right.
It's a little unnerving, but
yeah.
you go out and you do it. It's like getting off a roller coaster when you're done.
Yeah,
Truly.
totally. And the thing is with so many things in life that we get ourselves so freaked out about, one of the things I'll often ask when I'm speaking to groups, I'm like, how many of you worry what other people think about you, right? And most people and most audiences will raise their hand. And I say, look, I do too. We all do. It's part of being human. I was like, but one of my favorite sayings, I don't even know who said this, but you wouldn't worry so much about what other people think about you if you realize how little they actually did. Because who are most people thinking about?
Themselves.
Exactly.
And,
even when you're sort of on the hot seat in a situation, yeah, they're thinking about you for the moment, but mostly they've just got a million other things they're thinking about related to themselves. So, I had an old baseball coach that used to say, like, after a really bad game, he'd go, well, good news and bad news. What do you want? And I'd be like, bad news. So bad news is you pitched terrible. The good news is there's 1 billion people in China who have no idea and don't care, right? He would just try to put it in context that like it wasn't that big of a deal in the scheme of things. And I appreciated that perspective,
Okay, I'm going to flip the paradigm though here,
Yeah.
because people don't care. And unfortunately, that's the reality also for how a lot of supervisors and leaders don't care about their people.
Yeah.
Which is why this next point is so interesting and important to me. And I look back the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He talks about personal attention and appreciation, the two things we can't give ourselves. You talk about recognition versus appreciation.
Yes.
And how important those things are and really what a difference those make in the culture of an organization. Can you unpack that for us?
Well, and again, I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth. When I say that like people don't care, that's more from the perspective of us worrying so much about what other people think about us. If you think about this from a leadership perspective or a relationship perspective or even a sales perspective, like the relationships that matter most, it's super important for us to care about others.
Totally.
But not care from the critical, judgmental perspective. And the distinction that I make, Adam, between recognition and appreciation, both of which are very important and incredibly motivating. Most of us, when we do a good job and we perform at a high level, really would like to be recognized. And when we're not recognized, that's demotivating. There's nothing worse than working really hard on something or accomplishing something and people being like, oh, no big deal, right? So we want to recognize people when they deserve it. But recognition is about outcome. It's about performance. It's about what we do. Okay. Appreciation, on the other hand, is more about caring about people, valuing people. It's about who they are. So we want to recognize people when they deserve it. Appreciate people all the time. Because if we give people a trophy, if everybody gets a trophy, then the trophy doesn't mean anything. And we've gotten a little bit out of whack in our society about that, right? So we want to give the trophy when it actually means something. And not everyone gets it. And it's not a participation trophy. It's actually because you earned it. However, we want to appreciate people all the time. And the example that I often use when I'm talking about this is I was a pitcher in baseball. And most people know, even if you're not a baseball fan, when the pitcher does really bad in a baseball game, the manager literally stops the game, walks out to the mound, physically removes the ball, makes you leave, then hands the ball to someone else who takes over and starts doing your job for you, which kind of sucks, right? Especially if it's like the second inning and you're already losing 7-0. It is humiliating, deflating, demoralizing. It's awful, right? But the worst part of the whole experience, Adam, is when I go sit down on the bench, especially if I did really bad, nobody would talk to me. They would just leave me alone, right? Because that was kind of the unwritten rule. Oh, he must be really upset. Leave him alone. What I needed in that situation and almost never got was not recognition. And we're going to say, hey, Robbins, way to go. Great job. 7 runs in the second. No, that's inauthentic, right? What I needed was actually some appreciation, not for my performance, because the performance was bad, right? Like there's got to be some accountability. Like we're probably going to lose the game. Like we don't want to celebrate that, but that's probably not the moment to coach me on what I did wrong and how I can get better. That's the moment to connect with me as a human and make sure that I know I'm still valued and cared about as a human, even though I didn't perform well. So when we can separate performance and people, then we can really tend to and care about the people all the time. And we can either recognize or coach the performance depending on whether it's great or good or mediocre or poor. And people actually really appreciate it.
Amazing. How often should this happen? Because in a lot of places I see, your annual review is when you hear whether or not you're on either of these lists. I mean, what are your thoughts on, is there too much, too little?
I mean, I think you can customize it a bit, again, especially if it's a small business, but even if it's a bigger company, like usually it's not like 1,000 people you have to do that. I mean,
right.
Big companies do have to set up parameters, and that's why the annual performance review, that can be okay if it's just a thing that's in the calendar or it's a part of the year, but you want to be coaching people on a regular basis. Now, too much, too little, some of that's going to depend on your style as a manager. If you're a manager, some of it's also needs to be customized to who it is you're working with. So it's like, I often say to managers, look, here's a great conversation you can have with everybody on your team, however big or small the team is. Sit down with them and say, hey, if I wanted to motivate you and get the most out of you, what could I do? Tell me some things I could do that would really work for you. And another part of the question is, if I want to really irritate you or piss you off or stress you out, what could I do? Like, give me a little bit of feedback proactively about what works and doesn't work for you, so I can then customize my coaching style, my managing style to you. Now, I got to be myself, but I also want to know what works for you. Some people, autonomy is really motivating for them, leaving them alone, letting them figure it out. Other people won't say it like this, but they need more handholding. They need more checking in and making sure they're on the right track. One's not better than the other. It's just different.
Right.
And if you as a manager, as a leader, care about your people and really want to get the best out of them, you don't want to coach them just one way. You want to coach them the way they want to be coached so they perform their best. And that's the sign of a really good coach or leader, is someone who can tailor a bit of how, they have their philosophies and their values and their approach, but they can also tailor it. Look, just like we parent our kids differently. People manage people on their team differently, and we want to do it in a conscious way, not just, I'm going to give preferential treatment to the top performer and I'm being kind of a jerk to the people who aren't performing. Like, that doesn't usually bode well in terms of getting the best out of people.
Right. Interesting tool. I mean, I think everybody should go back and re-listen to what Mike just said, because the tool of asking people, how do you want to be appreciated or recognized, but also asking them what really upsets you, I think is a very powerful way of formulating how to help them maximize their outputs.
Yeah.
And frankly, build a great culture around people appreciating each other.
Well, in knowing people, I mean, a lot of people are familiar with that book, that relationship book, The 5 Love Languages. Yep. They actually the folks who wrote that book wrote a book about appreciation at work with that same model. And the idea being is that not everybody's motivated in the same way. Not everybody feels, in the context of a marriage, you don't feel loved the same way. So you want to know, what does my spouse, how do they experience that? But if you think about it outside of a romantic relationship or a family relationship, what is the quote unquote language of appreciation, so to speak, for the people on my team? Sometimes we do this thing. We often appreciate other people the way we want to be appreciated.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily motivating for them. We coach people the way we want to be coached. Again, it makes sense. It's not evil or strange or even selfish. We just have to step outside of ourselves and go, not everybody's like me. Not everybody's wired the same way I am. And that's a good thing. You don't want a team full of people who are just like you. That's usually not going to be a very high performing team.
Totally. Amazing. Speaking of books, you've written 5 books. The latest one is We're All in This Together.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've got more coming out, because your books are amazing, man. This is fantastic. Where can people find you, and where can they find your books online?
Yeah, best place to find me is our website, which is mike-robbins.com. And the books are all available on Amazon and wherever you get books. And I'm on all the social channels, but the website has links to all that stuff. So mike-robbins.com is the best place.
Awesome. And Mike has coached and spoken for a lot of amazing businesses. If you are a business leader looking for someone to come into your organization and really expound upon some of these things that we've talked about, please check Mike out. You will not be disappointed. I can assure you, Mike is really well known in the speaking circuit and in the corporate circuit of helping businesses really capture their culture and how to grow their leadership and their teams. So Mike, I have an important question I ask all of the great leaders on the show, and I love the answers I get, but I want to hear this one from you. How do you start your day with a win?
I have a series of things that I try to do every morning, and when I do, it's a real win. I mean, I try to get a good night's sleep to begin with. But when I wake up, the first thing that I do while I'm still lying in bed is I meditate. Sometimes for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, sometimes for 20 minutes. So that's my first thing. And if I'm home, I go downstairs, I clean the kitchen, empty the dishwasher, and then I sit down and I have 2 journals that I write in. One's just a regular share my thoughts and feelings journal. Another one is a journal where I write down things I'm grateful for. And then before I get on my computer or my phone, I try to move my body. So that either means go for a walk. I have a little rebounder in my office and some little free weights that I'll try to just, 10, 15 minutes of movement. Then if I do all of that and sit down at my computer, I feel like I've really won the morning and I'm ready to go. It doesn't always work, and sometimes I'm on the road, but if I can get most of those things done, that sets me up for a good day.
I love it. That's such a great morning routine, something that everybody needs to think about. Copy Mike's if you'd like. It's a great way to start your day. Mike Robbins, great author, great speaker, and just an all-around great guy. Thank you for all you do for those of us that follow you and keep track of the wisdom that you're sharing. Please continue to share that. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate you being on Start With a Win.
Thanks for having me.